I'd like to call to order the July 5th, 2018 meeting of the Tarrant County Elections Board. Thank you everybody for being here. The first order of business we have is the approval of our October 3rd, 2017 meeting minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
Motion approved. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the approval of Jairo Garcia, Tarrant County Elections Administrator, as responsible for procurement of election supplies for the November 6, 2018 elections per 51.003 of the Elections Code.
So moved.
Second.
And please note in the minutes that Mr. Garcia will be abstaining from this vote as the rest vote.
Please note that in the minutes.
So call for the ayes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
Motion passes.
I'm
Next,
assuming in this particular one that we don't have to have him acknowledge that he got this notification of the meeting by email.
I think we've established.
We
that
responded.
right
I
here, but
responded
that's
via
fine.
email,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you.
That's good form, good form.
Next item on the agenda is the approval per 87.002 and 87.027 of the Elections Code of the appointment of the Republican Party appointee Kelly Robertson as presiding judge of the Early Voting Ballot Board and Signature Verification Committee Chair, the Democratic Party appointee Emma Allen as the alternate judge of the Early Voting Ballot Board and Signature Verification Committee Vice Chair, and the members of the Early Voting Ballot Board and Signature Verification Committee as recommended by the Tarrant County Republican and Democratic parties. The list of names are attached to the agenda that was provided.
So moved.
Do we have a motion?
I make the motion that we accept these A, B,
I'll
and
second
C.
Okay, now I'm going to ask,
Comments?
I want to ask a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
There were supposed to, as I read through the stuff before, there was supposed to be an equal number. And then later, we came back and we also added a Libertarian and a Green Party and a whatever. I think there was actually, may have been 3.
That's been added to this?
No, not to this.
Oh, okay,
But the last time we did this,
yes.
we went back in and added at least the Libertarian and at least the Green Party. And I think we're just acknowledging the fact that even though the state law says there's an equal number, we're not doing an equal number.
We're doing the best we can. It's my understanding the Libertarians have now given additional names, but you're not agendized for them, so they'll have to be added at a future meeting.
Okay?
And I know that if additional names come forward, then they will be put to the board for the
Okay.
next.
So I just think that we need, again, because as it looks right here, we've got fewer Republicans than we've got Democrats.
Yes, and
And so I just want to, I don't want anybody to raise this up later on and it be something that we say, well, we didn't know that.
Perhaps we will get more names from the party chair as time progresses.
We could, but my experience as being the judge of the board, I went through and called a bunch of names and they couldn't work. So that's why I've scrubbed the list here, that they're full-time employed or whatever, and they didn't realize all the. So I scrubbed our list a little bit on that, and then so I believe these you'll have plenty to work the election.
And
Judge,
if I may, Your Honor.
this is everybody who said they could work. They don't all work.
Exactly.
Okay, so if, for example, Emma Allen couldn't work, then they go to the next name. So this doesn't mean all of these people work an election.
And I also understand that, but what we have done traditionally and historically, and what the law says are two different things.
Well, that's true.
And I go along very much with what has been happening here traditionally and historically, but it says that there's a lot of little things that need to be cleaned up in the law. And I think the way we've been doing it, I want us to continue to do it that way, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that this is a little bit separate and apart from the letter of the law and the way it states that.
From a legal
If I-
perspective, I think that this board is doing the best it can with the information provided to it, and it appears that the party chairs understand there's an opening to even that up, and so that will be something choose to and are able to come up with others, and I'm fine with where you are. Thank
Good.
you.
And the other thing is that while this would be the entire list to draw from, what we're in effect doing is creating this as a committee, and if you read the law, it's supposed to be the committee as a whole, and that's never happened, and it never should happen, and I think, you know, whether you have, I think what there just has to be is, maybe an equal, there needs to be some smaller amount, but that needs to be balanced each day too. And then if the Republican person is there, they're the chair. And if that person can't be there, then the Democratic alternate has to be there. One of those two have to be here.
Yeah, Judge, they work beautifully together, and I have had an opportunity to visit them. They have always worked well together, I think, and our person, Emma Allen, has been a longtime person, and I don't think you'll ever see a problem, because sometimes there may actually be more Republicans there for the ballot board, and but they make it work.
And again, I am very comfortable with the way it has always been done, but there was some issues raised. And especially as long as the two party chairs are here and are understanding and aware, then that way, if a question does get raised in the future, I just don't want somebody to say, well, now, wait a minute, here's what the law says, and the law says we can't do it that way.
Now, having worked the board with the Democrats, you know, I can recognize a lot of names on here, and they're great to work with.
Yeah.
I never had an issue with any of them as the presiding judge, and Emma's was great when we worked side by side in the primaries. We both, you know, I think got along real well.
And I think, you know, should Libertarians in the Green Party submit a name, I am more than welcome to see those people, you know, be put on the board, so.
In fact, there was pretty sure it was a Green Party name
There
that was
was.
there that I called him, the name and so forth, but he said he couldn't work that,
Right. In the
the
municipal
city elections.
city elections.
And I didn't see it on the November fall election, the constitutional amendment election. I didn't have that name, but I called him, and he said he could not work, so.
Might have reminded him to call and get his name off the list.
Pardon?
You might have reminded him to call and get his name off the list.
Just so, to make clear, this is a list of,
May I-
yes, ma'am,
One
please.
point, for anybody who is watching this recorded meeting at a later time, what the county judge made in passing a comment about that the chair would be the Republican Party person. And I wanted to note for anyone who's watching this and is not familiar with that part of election laws, that is statutory. It is based upon the county that had the largest number of votes for governor in the most recent gubernatorial race. So if that ever switched, it would switch by
Yes.
party. And so that is where that comes from. It was not anything else. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Navin, for that clarification. And just to summarize it, this is a list of eligible people that they are designating. When the board actually convenes, they will convene in equal numbers for each party. So if the board needs 12 people, the law says you pick one from.
Yeah, but what he's
one.
saying and what has happened here historically is that has not necessarily been the
Right,
case.
that, I mean, the way it goes, it happens is, the calls are made through the list, and depending on their availability, eventually the board has to convene. And if,
We have to
For any
try,
reason-
we definitely try to get an
Right.
even number of people to
Exactly.
match up. Sometimes, just because of work schedules and so
Yeah.
forth, you can't, so you don't reject one. As long as there's one member of a party
Exactly.
working on, you know, a partisan election, you might say, or the general elections, then, you know, we'll pair one up so that there's one with maybe the extra members, and they can work together as a
Right.
team of 3 instead of 2. And that's the way I worked it anyway, and it helped.
So
And
they-
usually we had the exact same number. But
Good.
if
Thank you.
somebody calls in sick,
Well, I just know y'all have done it and you've been comfortable with the way it's been done in the past, and I'm not suggesting any change whatsoever.
So, any other comments on the matter? Do we have a motion?
We have a motion and a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Chairman Garcia, can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
back you up to the approval of the minutes? Because I don't think you actually voted on the approval of the minutes. And I would just ask that you go through the formality of voting to approve the minutes.
Okay, let's go back to item number 1 in the agenda then. Please, the approve.
Two.
The approval of the October 3,
Make a motion.
17 meeting minutes.
It was motioned and seconded, and I don't think we just said aye.
Right, that might have
Okay.
been.
So,
Do I have a motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you
He
for
asked
that.
if any was opposed, he just didn't ask if there's any for the ayes. Okay.
Okay, so the last item we have on the agenda is an informative item that requires no action by this board. It is a presentation that, as elections administrator, I wanted to make to the board so that we can get some feedback from the party chairs, judge, sheriff as well, on an initiative there is out there, an option that the state offers to the counties for voting. So I will run through the presentation, then we can have an open discussion about it if you may. So I'm gonna excuse myself and put on my elections administrator hat. And I will now run this presentation for you. So the presentation is about, the term used nationwide is vote centers. There is an option to go into the vote centers program in Tarrant County. So I would like to start a discussion about this and see if this is an initiative the county eventually would like to enter. So what are vote centers? Vote centers are, the general concept is the option of having people be able to go anywhere in the county to vote on election day and not just limit them to the geographical boundaries of their residence address. That's the general concept. Now, in summary, it basically says, let's move you from an assigned location to wherever it is convenient. The traditional model works this way. You take your county and you divide it in precincts, which are geographical boundaries that, depending on the local law, in the case of Texas, is 5,000 voters. You can have a maximum. And what you do within those precincts is that you find a location to set up a polling place and you tell people to come into the polling place. So it's a model that brings people towards the inside. The concept of vote centers flips that and says, we are going to try to get people to go out of the precinct to wherever it is convenient. So if your kid's school is in a more convenient location for you, you can vote there. If you shop in a place that is close to another polling place and that's more convenient, you can go there. If your work schedule, if you start working at 5 in the morning when the polls haven't opened, and you finish work at 4:30, and you're close to a polling location near your work location, you can vote there. So it's about going out. And a lot of the discussion that sometimes confuses people is, are we reducing locations? Does that hurt the voter because you have less locations in the county? But if you think about it, and if there's one thing I'd like people to keep in mind is this next slide I'm going to show you is, from the voter's perspective, before vote centers, this is what your map of options looks like. With vote centers, it looks like this. And this is just a graphical representation. None of those dots on the screen are accurate. But it comes down to this. Polling place model, vote center model. Those are your options of where you can go to on election day. It goes on the thought process we have in this time of age. You want to go out shopping, you need to go to a bank. Most people, or a lot of people, will find where are the nearest bank locations, the branches. Where can I stop for gas? And that goes, it's applying that to vote centers as well. Where are the polling places that I'm close to? In this example, if somebody lived in that address, that's a random one I just picked to illustrate the point, you would have to go, and you worked on Tarrant County Sub-Courthouse, you would have to go back probably a 10-minute drive, a 10-minute drive back to then get to work. So you're adding about 30 minutes to go to vote on election day. In the vote center model, you could say, what are my options available? This one is just by the freeway. I can get off in 5 minutes, vote, and continue to work. Convenience. That's the general concept. What does the Texas law say about vote centers? I'm using the generic term used nationwide, but the actual name of the law is the Countywide Polling Place Program. And this is important because it refers to giving the option to vote to the voters on election day. If you go to other states, if you find other references, they talk about doing different things on early voting, on mail. This is just election day in Texas. This is almost literal from the law. The law says you must have DRE technology for voting. And I'm going to go into the details of that later on, but this is important because it will tie into another topic that I want to revisit later. The law says, how do you transition into the polling place, the countywide polling place program? Well, the first year, you can reduce your locations down to 60% of your original ones, what you would have used on that election if you went to polling places. So, if we have an election in May, and we say we want to go with the vote center model, we would say, in May, on this election, we would have 170 locations. Then we can go down to 60% of that. Yes, ma'am.
Is that the law? Because I know when Austin went to vote centers, they chose to make all of their locations vote centers at first, and then they went down from that.
Correct. The law says you can go down to, doesn't say you
Okay.
have to.
Okay, all
And
right.
that's what Austin did.
Okay.
My understanding, what Travis County did was, let's make every polling place a voting center, keep
Yes.
them all, and as we see how voters behave, we will reduce gradually. They
Yes,
chose to
okay.
go that way.
Okay.
And then after you complete the trial program, to call it somehow, in the first year, you can go down to 50% of the
Okay.
locations, no less than that. Okay?
Okay.
There is another consideration the law has for vote centers. You must have a balanced number of locations in your commissioner precincts. And the restriction is you cannot have one commissioner precinct that has less than half of any other in your county. So in this example, if we come up with a list like this of polling vote centers, precinct number 3 cannot has a problem because it has less than half of precinct number 1. So if you just add one, now the law, you're compliant with the law. So it's a way to create balance in between the areas with less density and the areas of high density, but my interpretation is it's that it's intended to prevent preference for certain precincts or anything like that. That's what's specific about the vote center model in Texas, and that's what the vote center model is. So the question is, why are counties nationwide tending to go to vote centers, and why is it such a hot topic? I've summarized it in 3 basic advantages that I can see in that. Increase customer satisfaction, reduce errors, and boost turnout, and reducing cost. So save money, make everybody happier, and make less mistakes. Let's go with the first one. The concept is simple. When people can choose where to go, when people have options, it becomes more convenient. When it's more convenient, you have a better experience. The process becomes a satisfactory experience. People tend to come out and tell other people, it's not that bad, it was pretty quick, you can go anywhere. Higher turnout. That's the general rationale that I've seen in the literature I've been consulting. Who's doing it in Texas? We've got all the counties you see there. That's over 20% of the counties in the state. Travis, which is one of the big 5, is in. Surrounding counties, we have Collin County, Parker County, Hood County. So people in Tarrant County know about this. And in fact, this is actually a conversation I had with someone on Facebook when I said, we're buying electronic poll books. People are wondering. They have people in the area that say, well, you know, in Collin County, I heard that you can go anywhere. I have someone who lives in Travis, they can go anywhere. So it's out there. And I think people are asking to at least have the conversation. Why? Quotes from other elections administrators in other counties. We have something in Texas that is very particular. Your polling place may not always be the same. And we just went through this in the primaries where between the March and the May runoff, parties reduced the number of polling places. So someone who goes to vote in March doesn't necessarily have to go to the same place in May. And in between those, we had a municipal election, which had a different set of polling places. So it can be confusing to voters just to know where to go. The convenience of just finding a place, any place, helps. And it ties into the reality we have in our state. Keep in mind something. More than half the people in the registered voters in our county, almost half, are voting early. Actually, it's more than half before Election Day, but almost half of them are voting early, in person. And I probably should have taken a chance to ask them why in these last elections, but they happened too quick by the time I got here. But I would almost bet that they are doing that because it's convenient, because they can go anywhere in the county during those 5, 10, 15 days that they have to vote early in person. To me, that's a sign of the convenience of people. Reason number 2, boosting turnout and reducing error. That chart right there tells you, in average, about 35% of the provisionals we reject currently are just because the person went to the polling place that was not the assigned one. They're registered, they're active. If you had gone to your polling place, we would count it, but we can't by law. And I know that some people, when I've shown this, they say, well, 8 votes, 51. We just had 3 races that had to go to a recount because they had 2, 3, or a tie. So this comes into play a lot even in the outcome of the election. When we talk about reducing error, there's another interesting reality we have in the state, or at least in this county. Our district, this is a map of the county, and the green shading is the Grapevine Colleyville ISD. And I took this one as an example because it happened in the election we had on May. District lines don't necessarily match precinct lines. So if you look at precinct 3542, some of it is in the district, some of it is not. And so when people go to the polling place, the poll worker, after he checks you in, or she checks you in, has to say, do I give you the green ballot or do I give you the white ballot? They have to make a decision there. Giving a voter the wrong ballot obviously is a problem. If you're supposed to vote on the green one and I give you the white, I've disenfranchised you from the Grapevine Colleyville ISD, and if I allowed you to vote on the other one, that's a problem. It's a legal problem. So vote centers actually, the concept of them generate and require technology that actually addresses this problem. Because when you go to a vote center, you're not just going to have the green and the white ballot, you're going to have every possible ballot in the county that you can offer. And so this is where I think the legislators had their minds or their focus on when they said it has to be DRE. There has to be some sort of digitally finding out what ballot to give you. There are 3 types of technology you can use for vote centers. One is what we use in early voting in person, DREs, on-screen voting, paper trail or no paper trail, you vote completely on the screen. 2 is, this is a new kind of system that's out there, ballot on demand. And so in ballot on demand, you have a printer at the polling place. When you check in, the printer creates the ballot. So we don't send blank ballots to the polling places anymore. We send blank ballot paper. And when you check in, the printer creates your ballot. And from there on, it's the same process we have. Shade your ovals, put it in the scanner. And then option number 3 is what is out there now. There's another called hybrid, in which you use the touchscreen to vote, and it creates a paper trail, and it hasn't been counted. That paper trail sometimes has a QR code or some sort of element that you then put into a scanner, and that's when it's counted. And so you have all, for those who like DREs, and I'm not saying I don't, I'm just saying arguments that we get from different sides of it, the advantages of not having overvotes, undervotes of the DRE, but you have the paper trail and the scan and the second chance of interpretation by the voter. So it's out there. Those are the 3 options we have. The SOS says that we can only use DRE and hybrid for vote centers, because the language in the law says you have to have DRE, and as you can see, the hybrid, you vote at a DRE even though you count the paper ballot. So that's the current interpretation. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to start having this conversation right now, because one of the goals I have by the end of the year is to procure new voting equipment for the county. And if we feel that the county wants to have this conversation and go to vote centers, we have to know which are our options for the future. Third reason was reducing costs, saving money. There are 2 places where you can save money with vote centers. Your operation gets cheaper, and your equipment might save you some money. Let's talk about operational costs. This is your typical, right now, Tarrant County layout of a polling place. You walk in, you're going to have 2 clerks, 1 or 2 clerks, depending on the size of the polling place, checking you in on the electronic poll books, the new ones we just got. And then once you're checked in, the alternate judge will be at the ballot table deciding which ballot, or helping you out to choose the right ballot. Okay? That's that green and white table that was depicted in the other one. The voter now goes to a voting booth or an ADA machine if they need to, and eventually put their ballot on the scanner. And there's a clerk who, besides helping on the curbside voting, is there to assist if there are any issues with the machines. So this layout, we feel, is usually can take care of about 1,500 people who vote on election day. Some lines, but these 5 people could help 1,500 people vote on election day. If you go to vote centers, this is the estimation, rough numbers that we've had. We can have the same 5 people serving almost twice the population in a larger vote center. Which means you're basically doubling or saving half the money you would budget for poll workers. And this is just election day pay. These are the typical costs for an election year. If you have in a March primary 176 precincts, you would have about 80 vote centers. You would be saving about $70,000 and so on. So that comes down to about $300,000 a year, just on paying the poll workers for the 14 hours of work, not including what you save on site rentals, on fewer trucks, fewer equipment, fewer deployment, training, etc. So there's some good money that is saved on this. The question is, the people ask is, why does this happen? How can you have more customers and have the same amount of poll workers and still help? The trick is actually in how the vote centers are chosen and the locations. The fact that you have a geographical definition right now with polling places means that you have to have a polling place in a location where maybe few or no people vote. And so when you start condensing those, you will find people who will say, you know what, I actually never vote because my polling location is kind of far from home, and they will start migrating to another. Some don't, and that's, I guess, part of where Travis County might have gone, opening all of them up and let people go through the process to then analyze where the downsides. But the summary of this is you have less idle time at the polling places because people concentrate around each vote center more. So you have more customers coming into each vote center. That's the experience that that is seen nationwide. And then the other money-saving place is the equipment. And this is a debate. I put it up there so we can talk about it. But based on about 400 locations in a countywide election in November, it's usually 375, 380. I rounded up to 4, and the same thing for the May election. This is about what I think you would spend based on list prices, average prices of equipment of different vendors and options. So the first horizontal scenario is vote centers. 200 vote centers is you have to buy enough equipment for that place. So we would buy about 1,700 DREs. This is the worst case, the hybrid solution where you need a lot of DREs and a scanner per polling place. It could be even cheaper, but let's look at the worst case. You would spend about $9.5 million buying equipment this year. We have enough equipment for 200 vote centers. If we say, let's do something maybe like Austin, where we keep the 400 locations, we equip them with voting machines that we can use later on at a vote center because we want to push the decision back 1 or 2 years. We don't want to do it right now. We don't know if we want to do it right now. We would need to spend about $600,000 more. It's a little over $600,000. And most of it is going to be, we were going to have to buy more scanners than we would eventually need. We could work probably when we do the RFP options with vendors, but you would spend more money, and then you would, when you switch to vote centers, you would probably have too many units. And that could be seen as a waste of money. Option number 3 is we say, okay, we just stay the way we are. We buy 1 scanner, 1 DRE per precinct. We don't go to vote centers, and we just basically upgrade our current platform. And that number on screen, about $3.5 million, is considerably lower than the 9.5 and going to vote centers. Here's the fine print in the contract. Remember, you have to add about $300,000 a year. You have to print ballots. It's about another $200,000. You have to spend money on more trucks, more logistics, more personnel. What and I haven't done a down to the penny analysis of this, but what I'm saying is the $6 million in difference between the third scenario and the first we're gonna end up spending over time $500,000-$600,000 a year over the lifetime of the equipment, anyway. And if it's not the same, it's gonna be very close, I think. So that's why. If we were to do this, how can we fit this in? What's the plan? This was a calendar I showed the Elections Commission back in April on procuring equipment. And so I said, we figure out the process, we're gonna go with an RFP, we do some demos, and then by September, we'll release the RFP, we get the offers. We can fit the discussions and the meetings we need to make a decision in vote centers in the time frame we have. Now, this is a decision of Commissioners Court, but obviously, this is not something I can do or my department can do on its own. We need to work with parties, we need to go work with the cities, we need to work with groups with disabilities, we need to work with a lot of people to come up with a proposal that makes sense, not just in the type of technology we're gonna use for voting, but in the locations of the vote centers and in the convenience they have or not. So, this is today. We could go to Commissioners Court on July 24th and do this same presentation, just informative, say, we have found this initiative, how does the court see it? We want to do some research, we want to go out, reach out to the public and do that. If we don't feel there's any objection from the court and saying we don't think this is a good idea, we would form the Citizens Advisory Committee. The law requires to have one. It doesn't specify who has to be there. Usually invite groups of interest, political parties, anybody who wants to have a say on where is it convenient and how we want to do vote centers. We meet throughout the month of August. We also have public meetings, one in each Commissioner's Court. We invite people. We say we're going to be at this location on this day, probably do this or a very similar presentation, tell the people what vote centers are about. And then we can go back to Commissioner's Court on September 4th. The law requires that there is, if you want to go to vote centers, a public comment session in Commissioner's Court, and even the recording and the transcript of the meeting have to be submitted to the state for approval of the program. So we would kind of pre-discuss it in the different commissioner precincts and then bring it formally to court. We want to have an item, again, for people to have a say. And then hopefully by September 18th, have the court, if everything goes well, say, we authorize the use of vote centers in Tarrant County. And the reason it's that tight, again, I'm trying to collect the information and get everybody on board so that it can be a lined up decision with the procurement, the purchasing of the new voting equipment that we have to complete by the end of the year. So that is what I had to show you. That is the initiative, that's the topic that's out there, and the intent was to bring it mostly to the party chairs to hear what your thoughts are on. So I'm going to go back to the panel up there and open up the floor for questions and comments.
I guess the question I have is how you, at a vote center, you gotta do it almost like you do early voting centers, as far as you don't really have a poll book. You know, like right now, when you go to your precinct polling location, you have a poll book and they have to manually look up the name and they sign in there. But I guess with the vote centers, you're gonna do it just like they do on early voting, where you print out a label and you sign.
Yeah,
the
actually,
label.
our department just bought 280 electronic poll books. And we have enough money from the state to buy probably another 200 more. So we're looking at having almost 500 by the end of the year. We're actually looking at the election in November to see if we can already not have the paper poll books even at precincts.
Oh,
So
that'd be
we
great.
will have the technology and the platform to support that already.
That's great, yeah. I hadn't heard that, but,
I probably should have brought one to show you.
No, personally, I like the idea of vote centers. I think our job is to try to make it easy, whatever party you're in, for our constituents to vote. My question would be, how do we operationalize it? I mean, at the beginning, I certainly wouldn't want to go to 60 locations. I think we have 60% of the locations, because I think we have to get voters used to it. But I think over time, I can see the savings, you know, the financial savings. I think the concept is great, though, because I think I told you, I sit in every election until after the polls close. And in every election, I have constituents who call me and say, where do I vote? And I say, you vote here in Keller, and they go, I'm in South Arlington. And so had we had a vote center, they would have been able to go to a location in South Arlington and vote. So I think it deserves looking into, and would be something, you know, I would be in favor of getting input from Tarrant County residents.
We have started looking at what information would be useful to selecting polling places. And I have some of the GIS staff we have in the office creating layers of data, public transportation, population density, just things that are available from the countywide GIS system, so that if this were to move through, at least we have available information that would help make a decision, turnout, you know, everything that we feel we might need to look into to avoid missing out on a good location and potentially disenfranchising people, which is not the goal we're going for.
I think we have to really look at it, though, because I'm sure, Daryl, you get the same complaints from people I do when we move polling locations.
Oh, yeah.
So changing a polling location is a major issue for some of our long-term voters, and so we get a lot of complaints if we change them. So clearly, I would want to look at this as we move forward to ensure that we're being very careful about how we, you know, establish the voting center locations.
This last election that you had, how many, let's go to the primary,
March.
March primary. How many different precinct or voting center or voting locations did you have?
230, I'm gonna round up the number, I don't remember the exact number.
Okay, so we approximately 230. So 60% of that would be 1,300, would be 138.
Yeah, but Judge, I would be concerned about going to 138 immediately. I think we'd have to look at it, and maybe the first election, we go with a higher amount, and then at each election, then we can then decrease it.
And so my next question to that end is, if we do this, then we buy equipment that ultimately is not going to be used, because we're going to start off, let's say, for example, we did like Travis County. We've got DRE equipment for 230 locations, when ultimately we may only need, ultimately we can only need 115 if we decided to go to the minimum of the 50%. So that's the only part of saying, you know, I'm not sure I would want to do every location, but I think that would be one of those things where, as we go through the town hall meetings or the meetings about this with the public part of it, that we get a good read from them and see if we can hit a happy medium. Maybe we don't go to 60, but certainly we may not stay at 100, because that means we're buying, unless we can rent some equipment.
That's what I was trying to say. Maybe leasing some of it is an option, you know, as we go forward.
And there's one thing I would add to that. If you have the full 230 locations, you would also have less equipment per location. So it's not exactly that the 50% you close or the 40% you close down is equipment you don't use, because now you're gonna have more people going into the ones you keep open. So you actually wanna add some in there. So it's not a one-to-one, if we close, this has no use, because you need more throughput now.
But are there certain pieces of equipment that you would have to have at least one at every location?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
The other question that I had, or at least the thing that I want to be sure of, again, going to the DRE, we're not connected to the equipment, the voting equipment itself. That's in no way connected to the internet.
Okay.
Correct?
None of them are.
But our poll books are.
Yes, sir.
So just as that's what I thought, just as a point of remembering,
Okay.
our poll books could be hacked, our voting equipment cannot be, because we're never tied into the internet. But somebody could go in, hack it, and vote twice, by saying that, okay, I voted, but then going back in and changing and saying I didn't vote.
I mean, I see the point. I wouldn't call it that somebody could hack, but the poll book is online,
That's-
and the voting equipment isn't. And the way that the information passes from one to the other is, if you have a system like the DRE or we have right now, the poll book will print a little receipt that says, put this ballot on the screen for you. And if you have something like the ballot on demand, the same poll book will print out the ballot for you. So that's how you know what ballot to cast in the machine, but there's what is called an air gap. There's no really connection of data anywhere between the poll book and the other one.
But just dovetailing what the judges said, not that what if they don't change that, hey, I voted and now I didn't, but if they went in there and said, oh, these 15 people hadn't voted and placed 15 imposters. What?
Yeah, that's, the concern, every time you have online systems, is that someone can get to them.
Right.
And so the standard for voting equipment is that it's completely disconnected from any network. The poll books, the electronic poll books, you need to be online because you want to know, because now you can vote anywhere, that if
Sure.
you voted here, by the time you get here, this other poll book already knows, so you need them online. The ones we had IT heavily involved in making sure that the setup was as safe as it can be. And right now we have something similar, so we have years of experience with the current early voting system where people can go anywhere in the county to vote. So I feel pretty confident with that, but I see the point. Full disclaimer that people know this one's online, this one's not.
I am very supportive of the vote centers, because I think it is very convenient, because like you said, I can remember when I was at the sub-courthouse, people come in there and say, I've voted at this sub-courthouse on election day for years, and I know damn good and well they didn't, because it's never been an election day vote center.
Yeah.
But, they're not at the point of willing to listen, and you're not gonna do anything by telling them they're crazy.
Yeah, I've been at the Euless Library, which is used for early voting, and then on election day, it's only one precinct that can vote there, and I turn away 2 out of 3 at least, or maybe,
Yeah.
3 out of 4.
So I think
Go
this is
vote
much
there.
more convenient, and the people who I have talked with that have used it, the counties that are using it, just swear by it.
Yeah,
So it looks like, yeah, go
I'm sorry,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we wanna encourage you to move forward.
yeah.
So what we'll do then is I'm assuming that we will schedule a briefing for Commissioners Court on July the 24th. And then unless, for whatever reason, the Commissioners Court were to say, no, we're not gonna do that, then I think it becomes then a matter of scheduling the meetings, and I would just encourage you to work very closely with your party chairs on seeing that, that they help with making sure that the people who they've got in the parties, that there's meetings set up and to look at that. And quite honestly, the whole discussion around going to the vote centers, I think can be tag teamed in with the new equipment. Because I think both of those are gonna be critical. And
That's what sparked this whole initiative, was looking into the equipment to buy and then saying, hold on. We wanna make sure that we don't look down, there are experiences in Texas of counties that have bought equipment and have looked back and said, oh, I can't use this now for vote centers. So they're locked into with new equipment and they can't make the transition. So I wanna avoid that. That's why
Okay.
I'm raising.
And then I guess the last question that I would ask is, we get all this done and we move down and everybody's happy, we're all singing Kumbaya. The likelihood would be that the first election that this would be used for would be the November or May of.
May. I would aim for May next year. If we get the approval from court in September, we're buying the equipment by the end of the year. We're getting it early next year. We can go and pilot in a small, more controllable election in May next year.
Okay,
Take a good learning experience. We don't have to tell the state anything. Based on the calendar they've done the last 2 years, they will probably release the forms to apply for the program in February next year. So by then, we will have bought the equipment, made a decision. We'll be just submitting paperwork.
and my first question I didn't ever give you a chance to answer, I don't think. we'll have 3 elections. Next year, we'll have a May election, and then we'll have a November election, probably only 2 elections next year.
Yeah.
So when we are calculating the 60% or the 50% totals, what elections will we use to make that determination?
The law doesn't mention it, it says, the language is something like what you would have used in the election. So a natural thing would be to look at the last November and the last May election. Now, if we have too few entities next May, compared to this May, where we had basically a countywide election, might not be, so we might have to be doing exercises where we say, okay, if this were polling places, how many would we do? And then we can't do less than that.
So my
Especially
suggestion
for
would be,
May.
so my suggestion would be is come up with some examples of what you think
Okay.
we would do,
Right, okay.
and then know that we have a legislature that's gonna be in session. And if we have we might be looking for some clarification from our legislature on exactly how they would do it, so that we don't end up fighting about how many we should have. And that gives us that opportunity to do that beginning in January.
And one thing, I think, I see the value in maybe not doing a whole 100% because you're not saving the money, but not necessarily pushing all the way down to the minimum the
60,
first
yeah.
year. Because people adapt to it. Once people understand, this is the place that I like to go to vote, they will start going to the same place.
I don't
And so
disagree with
you'll
that.
see,
Yeah,
you'll
yeah.
see naturally a kind of a curve of, these are the ones we wanna start shaving out every year, and people just get used to it. No matter what happens every year, I go here.
So your thought strategically is May, the municipal elections, the school board elections is where we would be the guinea
Pilot
pig.
it the first time, yes.
I think
Next
that's
May.
a good one. But I want to go on record as thanking the elections office in Hyder for even exploring this. And you know we had to go to new equipment, so, you know, I like you being proactive and looking at both of them at the same time. Because I would not want to spend the money to buy equipment, and then we turn around and look at vote centers. It doesn't make sense to do them separately. So I appreciate your putting some thought into how we move forward.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Do we have any? So we'll talk to start.
Yes.
So I believe if we have, any comments from the public, we have on the agenda as the last item for this.
He's done for public, he don't count.
So then I guess this meeting is adjourned, and I thank everybody for coming in today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all I apologize again for being late.
No
The judge
problem.
knows I don't like to be late, so.
We'll blame it on Commissioner Brooks.
Okay, yes, okay. And Marco, thank you for